All right, hello everyone. I'm here with Dr. Nick Sakis, who I studied with before. He was a few years ahead of me in the medical school program, and he went on to practice in Orlando. Keep in mind this whole video, this was Nick's wedding week, and he became a part of the largest mass shooting in United States history, where there were 49 people killed and 58 injured, and just floods of people coming through the ER doors. And I mean, the point of my channel is not to depress you, rather it's to recognize the amazing people who contribute to the field of medicine. So Nick, can you please tell us, how did you end up in Orlando?
Hi, Kaylee. Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm excited to have the opportunity to go ahead and just tell my side of the story and what I experienced that night. But to answer your question, so I had gone to medical school at St. George's University. I did my first year actually in England, my second year down in Grenada, where we went to school together. And then my next two clinical years, third and fourth year, were done at a hospital here in California. After I got done with medical school, I did a year of research, and then since my parents in the meantime had moved to Central Florida, my goal was to try to get back as close as I could to the Tampa area, which is where they were living. And I applied to residencies and ended up matching into a surgical residency there in Florida.
And so, if you could you give us a recollection of that night's events?
Yeah, I can. Even a year out from that night, and it's amazing that it's very easy to recall all the details of that event. So I will try to keep it concise and hit the key points, I guess. So the way that it works is that night, we were on call over the weekend. So when we're on night call, we come in the evening. We stay for anywhere from a 12 to 16 hour shift, depending on how busy it is towards the end of the shift. And as a matter of fact, unfortunately, the night before the Pulse shooting is the night that they brought in Christina Grimmie, which was an unfortunate, tragic loss as well. The next night we were sitting at the computers putting in some orders, wrapping stuff up with other patients, when the way we get alerted with new traumas that come down into the trauma bay is by a pager. And we got a page that said mass casualty incident, more than 20 traumas. And to see that message, I was there with the other intern that was on that night, and we kind of made eye contact and decided, time to jog downstairs. And it took us about 2-3 minutes, I'd say, to get down there. And in the meantime, our senior resident that was on that night, Dr. Josh Corsa, texted the both of us and said, "It sounds like there was a shooting at a nearby club. There's going to be multiple traumas that come in." And to hear 20 traumas, you can't quite wrap your head around it, because the most that we have is some of our bad motor vehicle collisions that will bring in 3 or 4 or 5 traumas. By the time we made it down there, like I said, it took us about 2 to 3 minutes. There was already 2 patients that had been wheeled in, and the excellent ER staff had already been, providing care until we showed up. When we showed up, there wasn't but a few minute pause before the patients started coming in 2 by 2. And this happened until we had, just like they had said, approximately 20 patients that came in. And to give you an idea, our trauma bay in Orlando, it's a level 1 trauma center, which is as high as you can get. And we had 6 different beds for patients in our trauma bay as a level 1 center. And to have 20 patients that now we have to figure out how to provide appropriate and adequate care to was a skill that, our attending and our senior residents and the rest of the staff had not necessarily run a drill in the past, but to see the coordination that actually did end up ensuing as they kept bringing patients in was incredible. And all those patients came in, and we did what we were trained to do. We placed central lines so that we could give patients fluids and blood because of how much blood so many of these patients had lost. We wrapped up bandages and tried to stop any of the massive hemorrhaging that these patients had. We placed arterial lines to closer monitor blood pressure and chest tubes as well for those that had been shot and had collapsed lungs to relieve some of the pressure from air, blood in their cavities that were collapsing their lungs. So we did everything we could. At that time, there was other members of the staff trying to call in backup because this was not something that just us 5 residents and the one attending on our trauma team, as well as, of course, there was also the ER staff and residents that were helping. But of course, as you would imagine, this is something that needed an all hands on deck approach. So those first 20 or so patients came in, and we stabilized them as well as we could. We got the operating room ready. We had to call in extra operating room staff. And finally, it got to the point where our attending Dr. Smith said, Nick, go upstairs, go to the ICU. That is now where we had our most critical patients that needed further treatment. When I got up there, one of the residents that was up there handling the ICU asked me to go ahead and take care of the patient in room 1, which she tells me what had happened at that point is that they thought they had lost him at one point in the night, and the coroner had actually been called. And to go back into the room and see again that he had a heartbeat after being thought that we had lost one of the victims was incredible. So at that point, I did what I could. We stabilized the patient even further, and I looked down at my cell phone and I noticed that I had gotten a text message from the other intern saying, "Where are you? There's 20 more coming."
Unbelievable.
And to hear that the first time in the page that we received was one thing, but to hear it again and now this time know that the number 20, truly was not an over-exaggeration, was the first time in the night that I really felt the emotion, because up until that point, we were all running on adrenaline and acting as quickly as we could to do what we had been very well trained to do from our superiors. And it wasn't until that moment when I started jogging back to the trauma bay that, I was overcome with emotion at that point. But again, we got down to the trauma bay and it was just continue what we were doing and do it all over again.
And on top of all this, there was a point in time where you thought there was even maybe potentially another shooter in the building while you were dealing with all of this. Is that right?
Unfortunately, yes. There was a point in the night when we were in the trauma bay, and over the loudspeaker, they announced that there was an active shooter in the building. And immediately when we heard that, there was no further details. There's 2 entrances to the trauma bay. I grabbed a crash cart that was behind me, and the other entrance got blocked off with a large portable x-ray machine. And I dropped down behind the crash cart, and, that's the closest that I'll ever be which is by no means near what these mostly kids, these patients, the victims, felt of being trapped and knowing that there might be a shooter in the building. And the only thing I could think to do was to grab my cell phone, and I typed out a text to my wife, my parents, and my 2 sisters, and it just said, "I love you all so much." And I hit send, and the second that I saw that it went through, I popped back up, I set my phone down, and we got back to doing what we were doing. And I can't even tell you a specific time where we decided that we had to open the doors back up, but the next thing I knew, the doors were open, patients were coming in, patients were going out. It had just been decided that we were put here for a reason, and that's to stabilize and treat as many of these patients that came in through the doors as we could. And even though there was this possible threat of a shooter in the building, we had to just keep moving. We had to keep getting these patients to the OR if necessary, and keep bringing the patients in that were being dropped off in the ambulance bay. And eventually we found out later that, in fact, that was not true. But in the moment, everybody acted appropriately, and it was amazing to see everybody just get back to work and do what was best for the patients ultimately.
I can't even imagine dealing with that when you're already going through so much. And can you let us know also, what's the most memorable thing that was particularly maybe something positive? I can only imagine what the families are feeling right now, so maybe just a positive, memorable moment.
Looking back on a lot of the moments, the way I have chosen, and I think that a lot of the community has chosen to recall the events, is in as positive of a way as we all can. So a lot of our recollections now have a positive vibe, but I'll tell you, there was patients that they kept bringing in, and most of the time someone gets brought in and they're centered on getting care for themselves. This community, when they got brought in, these victims, all they would ask about is, where is my cell phone? I need to find my family member. Where is the friend that I came with? Just selfless, the most selfless group of people I've had the pleasure of being in contact with, just wanting to know if their loved ones were there, if they were getting taken care of, if they had made it even out of the club. And, one patient specifically that I remember just grabbed me by the arm and said, "Doctor, am I going to die?" And you can't answer that with 100%. You don't know what's going to happen. We hadn't even assessed fully the injuries that some of these patients had, but at that moment I realized how much support at that point, not just medically, but emotional support that these patients needed at that time. And that's what, if you would have seen our nursing staff at work in providing this emotional support, telling them you're going to be okay, and finding their cell phones, getting them in contact with their loved ones, as many as they could, it was beautiful. So if I had to draw probably the most positive memory from that night, from that shift, I would have to say it was the overall just love and compassion that these patients provided for one another.
Absolutely. And I remember the message I really got from this whole night was in relation to something you had said before, and that was, be kind to one another. And I just saw that quote is so powerful. And I remember Ellen DeGeneres even reposted what you had put because it was so powerful. It truly comes down to just be kind to one another.
It's, over the coming days, the weeks, um, the months, this entire year, that has been a most obvious theme throughout how the community is handling such a tragic event. And that is exactly what they've been doing. And none of us could have done it. I was involved. I had my group that I was there with. Then we had another support group of the entire residency, all the residents involved. But it by no means stopped at the walls of the hospital. The support went into the city. It went nationwide. There was people from so many different countries even pouring in support and offering to send whatever they could, whether it was food for the staff that had to be there overnight, whether it was donations to the GoFundMe account that raised millions of dollars. It was incredible to see how much support the community provided. And that's what it comes down to, is we don't necessarily have the power to stop every last one of these events from happening. But if any community could learn from how the Orlando community dealt with such a tragedy, it would be to just take care of one another, treat one another how you would want to be treated, and continue to spread that love, because it did become infectious, and a smile went a long way in the midst of all this.
Absolutely. And I have to ask too, what effect has this night had on you this year? Because not only was it during your wedding week, it was probably the most traumatic event I can ever imagine. And then you went on to having your little girl within the year, and there's probably been almost no time to really mentally bounce back from that, because everything's just one after another. I'm just wondering, what effect has this had on you this year?
As I alluded to earlier, the fact that this was overall a tragedy, and a tragedy takes on a negative connotation. And to be able, not just myself, but the entire community, to flip this and find the positivity in it and provide the support to one another, the effect that it's had on me is it's made me appreciate the little things in life. It's made me establish contact with people I hadn't talked to in a while. It's made me realize how important it is to sit back and think, when you see someone in the street or in public that might have acted rude to you or is not as talkative, and you never know what somebody else is going through in their life. And a smile, a pat on the back, a hug, a good job, a thumbs up, these are the littlest things that we don't realize, and how difficult it is. And I've tried to be the person that people ask me, my goodness, Nick, why are you so happy today? And just on a day-to-day basis, I think it takes more energy to be a grump than it does to try to spread some joy. And really that's what's given me the energy to get up, go back to the hospital, see these patients. And I think it's a love and compassion, a lesson in love and compassion that you couldn't get in any other way. And as much as I don't want anybody to have to go through what anyone involved had to go through that night, it was a huge learning experience, and it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my career.
My heart just goes out to the family and victims, and I feel terrible that we had to do this interview a few times due to technical difficulties too, because it's brought Nick almost to tears every time we've talked about this. So my thoughts and prayers with the families, truthfully. I've got my Orlando Strong bracelet on today in memory. And I wish there was more I could do other than just wear this bracelet, but I would love to show the audience, though, your new little one, Tina, just to show them some positivity from the year.
She got dressed up in her colors to show support today as well.
Little Tina, Orlando strong.
And her shirt says "World Changer," and it's interesting because we had this shirt before any of this happened, and it just when I got home and I saw her in it, I hadn't seen her all day. It made me realize that this right here is the generation that we need to take responsibility for raising to show the love that we've been talking about this entire interview. And these are the little ones that need the proper direction to grow up and know that hate is something that we need to overcome. And I mean, we love her so much. It's been a busy year. I mean, getting married, having a child, moving across the country, changing residencies. It's been busy, but each one of them comes with a learning experience, and I think that's a lot of what I've loved, what I've learned is that we just got to take care of one another. And even though we can't stop these events necessarily from happening, we can go about taking a negative circumstance and giving it a positive twist.
That is a beautiful message, and we are so thankful for everything that you have done. And baby Tina just stole my heart. Oh my goodness, it's such a hard interview for me because I'm like all the emotions of sadness, but then I see baby Tina, just so precious. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I just thank you so much for all that you've done, Nick, and I really want to celebrate you as one of the people who have contributed to the field of medicine this year. So thank you so much for being on the show, and my thoughts and prayers again to the families and of the victims, and I just hope everyone does remember truly just to be kind to one another.
Thank you, Kaylee. I mean, before we go, just two more things I wanted to say. One, I never would have been able to do this without the amazing training that I've received, and everybody involved in my training is very aware of it. All my attendings in Orlando, all of my senior residents, even my co-residents that were there that night and were there for the rest of the time before until the very last patient got discharged. And then the second thing I want to say is I have prayed every single day for these families, and I know our co-residents and attendings have as well. And I'll continue to do that. And any families that were involved, victims, survivors, my heart goes out to them truly. And again, just remember, go out of your way, to do something kind for someone else, and you never know how much you could be doing for them.
Absolutely beautiful message, and thank you so much for being here with us today, Nick.
Thank you, Kaylee. Thanks for letting me share the story.
Take care.
You too.
Tina.